All right. Hello, everybody. So I am absolutely excited for what's going to be the last panel of our day. And I'm not excited just to talk to some really incredible people, but I'm also excited, I think, for what this day has represented, or what the last couple of days this summit has represented. I joked with some of the members via text and on the phone that a month ago, trying to wrap a crazy year, trying to wrap a crazy semester, I was on the phone with Armin going like, can we just cancel the summit? Can we all just stay home and watch Star Trek reruns? Something. This has been an incredibly, incredibly hard year. And for some of our friends and colleagues and institutions, it's been utterly devastating. But what I think is exciting is the stories and the career arcs and the paths of the artists we're about to talk to are all on the up, and looking forward to a really exciting 2021 and beyond. I'm excited for that. I'm also incredibly appreciative for everybody who attended the MIA Summit, because despite the flagging energy, the end of the semester, everything that we've been through, the presentations the last couple of days, the research presentations, the panels, it has been awesome. So thank you to everybody who's been talking today. You've helped buoy my spirits and even get me in a very exhausted state. Excited for the fall, excited to jump back into the classroom in the same way I know our artists are excited to be back on the stage. Managers are excited to be back in the captain's chair. So let's get to it. I'm just going to start rolling through some of our questions to talk about post-pandemic planning for artists and managers. And I'm kind of excited to be able to have a dueling conversation with the artist on the creative side, the manager on the strategy side. And of course they overlap, but just to see, has the calculus changed, right? Has COVID accelerated or really fundamentally changed some of our planning? So I'm going to start by reaching out to you, Dessa, partly because in February you came and did an artist residency on our campus, and it was awesome and empowering. And as we were sort of wrapping up, it's like, hey, what's the rest of the year looking like for you? And you're like, I'm on my way to First Avenue, and I got a show in New York, and I've got a thing starting in London. And then the world shut down. Dessa, could you take us back to what March 2020 felt like for you?
Yeah, you're right. I had spent a few days on campus, really dug it. I was there with my long-term collaborator, Matthew Santos, who sings and plays guitar. And we were gearing up for like a pretty healthy couple of quarters of touring. So we were both really looking forward to what would have been our second tour through China at that point. And we had some domestic dates on the books as well. And then I was in the midst of launching a podcast, many of whose episodes I recorded in London. So as it became clear how big this public health risk really was, I think we were all kind of guessing for a while, and masks, weird, you're weird. I realized how serious it was maybe later than I should have. And then I had been in London working on a podcast, and my phone dinged, and I saw that then President Trump had announced, travel restrictions. So like every other American in the UK, it was a scramble to try to find a ticket home. That was for me the moment I realized this is a world changing thing. And all plans are canceled, as we knew it. This is a time to totally reconsider not only what our business is and what our art is, but what life is going to be for the next 2 months. Yeah.
Well, you just threw out the word business. So Becky, let me drag you into the conversation. You, like Amber, are looking over an artist who's a multi-hyphate involved in a whole bunch of projects. Dessa, you just mentioned 11 in the first minute. What was it like suddenly logistically trying to get a handle on canceling? And for you all, was it canceling, or was it playing that game of, well, let's reschedule for May, let's reschedule for August and just see what happens?
Yeah, there was a lot of that. I think the initial reaction was just for some short-term problem solving and not long-term strategizing. I think it was just a matter of going through the calendar and working with promoters to get tickets refunded or rescheduled, and just figuring out what we were going to do. In a lot of cases, it ended up that we rescheduled for summer And then in summer, we rescheduled for fall. And then in fall, we rescheduled for fall of 2022. So it was just kind of playing that game a bunch of times. But go ahead.
I was going to say, so, moving through, Sav, how about you? You're in a band, The Accidentals, and from the looks of it, as an outsider and a fan looking in, you've just had growth year after growth year after growth year. It's really exciting. I'm guessing you were really amped up for what 2020 was going to hold as we blew the clock in 2019.
Oh, 100%. We'd actually been working on a record with two of our dream producers, John Congleton and Tucker Martine, and we were slated to fly back out to Portland on March 14th to work with Tucker. And literally that week, it was just, we had to make this huge decision. Do we go home or do we fly out and possibly get stuck there for a while? So we ended up driving home and building a home studio and finishing the record there. And also just doing a lot of collaborations during this time, which turned into an EP. Just stayed really busy as much as we could.
Now, Amber, that's going to make me, bring the conversation to you. Part of what anybody in a management hat is going to be doing is cheerleading and encouraging, in addition to what Becky was just highlighting, which was dealing with some of the logistics. How do you cheerlead an act? And you have a roster of acts. How do you cheerlead an act through, it's going to be okay, we're going to figure this out, when frankly, none of us knew that this was going to be okay?
Yeah. Well, I'll speak directly to the Accidentals. They've been through so much in the last 2 years. They are great overcomers. And I think in this business, you have to be. A lot of times it's feast or famine. So they've learned how well to take care of themselves when things go south. And this was just one more sort of challenge, I guess. This was a big one. This was huge. I mean, these guys, they make over $500,000 a year, and they just went to nothing, zero, and it was quick. So it was really like Becky said, it was putting out trash fires for the first 2 weeks. And then after that, we're all sitting around a table kind of lamenting all the things that are horrible about what just happened. And I remember Katie, the other female female front of the Accidentals, she just looked around. She goes, "Okay, but look what we just got. Look what we have for this moment. We have time, and we've never had time. So what are we going to do with the time that we have?" And I thought that was absolutely so indicative of them as a band. They rarely look at something too long in the negative before they go, "Okay, what are we going to do about it?" And so that's where the planning started.
Well, I think that's what is so encouraging about Dessa, what I've seen from you, again, from afar over the last year, and Sav, for you as well, the Accidentals. You all didn't stay put. And that's the next thing I sort of want to drill into. Dessa, soon after the lockdown, you launched the Force Majeure series, which is literally what we were all dealing with. What were the goals behind that? And what was the guests involved? What was the wrangling to suddenly pivot? And now I'm going to do an Instagram Live event. And what was that, weekly? Was that monthly?
Yeah. So I started a couple of weeks, I think, after lockdown, and it was a super low production gig. It was essentially just like an Instagram Live weekly show that would happen, at an appointed hour. But I tried, I think with some degree of success, to build in the little parts of an event that would be attractive when we were still together. So it was as much about just seeing the same faces every week. It had a really dedicated, if not huge, following. But I invited people to dress up from the waist up or put on makeup, maybe, which they hadn't done for weeks at that point. And so I think part of the fun was even just looking at the photos that people would post of themselves afterwards, looking civilized for that 17 minutes. And we would clap out the window at 8. So it was a series that was 100% in response to the pandemic and designed to respond to that kind of indefinite social limbo, in addition to the music stuff. And so, as far as the art, pretty lo-fi, man. For a while I was just reading, poetry and singing. I'm a bad pianist, so just sort of banging along with what I could, and And then I was lucky because my next door neighbor at the time, Lot, was a violinist. And so she would step into the hall at the appointed hour and we would just put a camera kind of, at the end of it so we could keep our 6 feet but duet together. Yeah.
So Sav, the same question to you. And actually I'm going to jump back to Des in a second. You all launched a daily series and you called it the Daily Breather. And I think, and it's interesting watching a bunch of them, you focused on breathing, you focused on coming down, you focused on speaking through trauma. And I think it speaks to both of you and Dessa, and your empathy as performers for the audience, whether it's inviting people to dress up and feel like they're going out and feel special, or it's encouraging people to relax and come down. How quickly did that decision or that creative idea for the Accidentals come about, Sav? Was it, well, let's just do it daily? I mean, what really sort of guided that? How do you figure out what to do when it's never been done before?
Well, the great thing about art and the reason why we do it half the time is it's not only free therapy for ourselves, but also a good way to talk about, the things that we're feeling in a public platform and allow people to resonate with that. It's ultimately what connects us and gives us a minute to just feel like we're not so alone. Which during a time of isolation, I feel like art was just crucially important. It's always been, but during this time, we really wanted to make sure that people felt like they weren't all alone in it. So coming up with the Daily Breather, we took a lot of inspiration. We came together as a group with Amber and kind of talked about what are some things that are calming, what are things that people need right now, what are we looking for? And we took inspiration from fellow artists like May Earlywine, who were doing live streams at the time as well, and just kind of figuring out, well, what's needed. And so the Daily Breather is, for those who don't know, it was basically like we would do a couple of deep breaths. We would recommend a book. We'd play one song, and we would light a candle and send out thoughts to whoever needed it at the time. And that continued for, I want to say, 4 or 5 months straight, where every day we were just live streaming for like maybe 5 minutes at noon. And people still, like, we put them all on our YouTube so people can go back if they need them and just play the playlist. It was a cool thing. I'm really glad we did it.
That's fantastic. And Becky and Amber, how about sitting in that management chair? How do you help an artist brainstorm through something that is so of the moment and sort of roughshod and, well, what can we do? Let's try. I mean, is there much strategy? Are there any guardrails that you feel that should be up there to protect the artist, or do you just let things fly?
I hear what Sav was saying about about using the time. What Amber was saying about using the time, and I know that early on, Des and I had a conversation with her agent who was like, "This is like, you need to use this opportunity to create." And there, I understand the logic behind that, but I think that in practice, it's still kind of a challenge to get your mind right and be in a creative space where you feel like you're able to produce art. And for a while, Des and I had a hashtag that we would send back and forth to each other whenever an opportunity would arise that was called LNOU, which stood for Leave No Offer Unconsidered. So like anything that would come to us, whether it be a virtual speaking gig or a voiceover thing, or just like any kind of, just thing to stay busy and engaged, we would talk about it where normally we maybe wouldn't consider those kinds of offers. So I feel like there was a little bit of just like being a little bit hungry and like trying to find things to do like on a short term, but not necessarily a meaningful type of thing. You know what I mean? So I think the ability to create was hampered. I don't know. I'm speaking for Dessa here. Maybe I should let her weigh in on how she felt about it. I know that it wasn't like a fun writing retreat time or anything like that.
No, it certainly wasn't fun. But I'm wondering now, I'll poke at you for a moment, Amber. Were there things that you all learned? Because I think it's really interesting going through, I found the Daily Breathers series, looked it up, and like, oh, holy goodness, it was daily, right? I mean, suddenly 90 some videos popped up. Some really resonated, right? You could see that there was a regular audience, and then all of a sudden, ooh, 8,000 views, 10,000 views. Were you all able to learn anything about fans, about your audience, about what the community needed and felt as you sort of went through that process?
Sure. I think I'm going to back up just a second. When the band's on
Please.
tour, they do a check-in every day with each other, and it's just a daily check-in. And they look at each other and they're like 1 to 10, and everybody gives a mental health piece. And a lot of times that mental health piece is 3, you know. And I used to tour with the band, so we would all do a quick daily check-in. And at the time, I would say, okay, what are you grateful for today? Because a lot of times we forget what we're grateful for in the midst of all the chaos and and this is a band in the last year who they've lost $100,000 worth of instruments. They've lost a trailer. They've lost, their car got shoved over an embankment. I mean, everything that could happen has happened. And so here we are at the end of the year. And in that process, they've been able to overcome all these things, and then COVID. And so this was really that could be the final straw for these guys. It was just that last, oh my gosh. And so I think, that constantly recognizing your daily gratitude. What are you thankful for? What do you have in the midst of what you don't have? And that was where the daily breathers came from, was the band asking themselves that check-in and then going, you know what? I think a lot of people need this. A lot of people need to know what we do on tour to get through all these things. And some of that really comes back to, we do a lot of reading, whether that's self-help or it's just, sci-fi or whatever it is that we can get into on tour versus while you're home. They try to read a book that will kind of span that time period from being on tour to on home, so that there's something that connects those two worlds. Because otherwise it's a really mental health discussion to be on tour 250 shows a year, which is what they tour. And then trying to come home for 2 weeks, which I think is the longest they've really ever been off prior to this in the last 8 years. So coming home to an endless sea of days and not knowing where that's going or where that next show is, and understanding what the loss was, it was really key that you find some piece of gratitude in it. And I think what we learned through all of it, watching the comments come in, is that people really grabbed onto that. Even when sometimes Sav or Kate would forget to say the gratitude piece, it would do the candles or do the song and everything. And then Michael would be like, oh, we forgot, people were already going, wait, I'm grateful for, And I think that was something that was really, really key for that whole span of time. And there was a point where it felt like, at the 3-month mark, I think there was a point where it felt like we've done enough of this, right, and it's time to go to once a week. And they did a 3 for Tea once a week for the next 3 months. And then we eventually stopped the live, online lives, because they knew they were releasing an album, which was also created in the midst of all that. Because Sav is OCD and ended up writing a manual on OBS that everybody in the industry picked up, and then created a lot of collaboration with other artists, which then led to the making of the EP that tabled the whole full album and pushed out the EP that was all about this time period. So it's been an interesting, crazy ride. But I think what we learned from it is, given time, these guys can really figure out how to, how to grow within this time, which they did immensely. It was insane, the amount of growth between producing their own album, which was a first, engineering, producing, and recording, a new album, the co-writing online, and the connecting with fans in the UK, especially, who we hardly ever get time with. Now they're tuning in every single day. Was just an eye-opener from a management standpoint. I was like, why haven't we done this before? We didn't have an audience per se that was quite that connected, but why didn't we do this before? And how do we continue to do it after, where we can keep this very global world open to the music? So.
Well, absolutely. And I think that's the interesting thing. Dessa and Sav, we got through a period, but then at least it seems from an outsider's perspective that the creative juices started flowing again. it was early fall, Dessa. You were putting out new music. You had a song out, Tyranny, that led prior to the election. When did you feel, and there were also stories of studios starting to work. A friend of mine who owns a facility, he figured out, he's like, if I lock myself in the control room and then just leave the front door open, the artist can come in and we can figure it out. When did those creative juices when did you move from maintaining to, getting excited again? What was that process like? Starting with you, Dessa.
Yeah, I think you probably hit it on the head. So if the flurry of just like unplugging the machine, like getting the gears to stop, really did take up the first month or so. And just to maybe tack on to what Becky and Amber had alluded to as well, like how much work it is just to stop the machine. Like,
right.
I think the last email that Becky and I shared with one another about like trying to get hotel refunds was yesterday. This is
a lot of time on the phone with Expedia.
Oh my God, Expedia. So it's a really long process, but it was probably like late summer, early fall that for me, it was like, okay, I'm really ready to get back into it. And some of that I think probably just had to do with like the like adrenaline daily level coming down enough to be able to like think creatively and do stuff, but also to talk a little bit, I guess, about what Amber said about having learned both the audience and about creative process. I think Becky and I also noticed like, when we're doing stuff in the middle of the afternoon, like people tune in from way farther afield than we thought that they might. Why don't I know that already? And then also I learned just as an artist a lot more about the diminishing return point on working on a given project. So left to my own indulgences, I'm likely to really like polish the heck out of a song before I'm ready to release it. And that just wasn't possible. I can't sit in the control room and go, hold on, I want it panned, 3 more degrees stereo field, because you can't sit in a room with anybody and you can't email that effectively. And so I realized that I was polishing some good stuff off and feeling uncomfortable about not having as much control in the beginning.
Right.
I think it led to better music, which was a delight to learn that like ease off the brakes just a little bit. And I think I can get more done and like what I make more. Mm-hmm.
Well, this is encouraging. I mean, and this is what I really hoped that we would get to, is that, oh my gosh, this year was a minute, but there's some really powerful things coming out of it. And Sav, I know Amber already addressed some of these things, but you started with the Daily Breathers and then you switched and then you switched again and turned some of the live streams into an EP. When did you as the band really feel, okay, now let's start going in a different direction? And when did those writing juices start to flow? Because you were doing lots of covers, you were doing favorite songs, and then the next thing you know, it seems, oh my gosh, there's a whole bunch of new music and there's co-writes. And I can only imagine, like Dessa, you're emailing files back and forth around the world. When did that really start happening for you?
Well, yeah. So like I said, in March, we had plans to travel to go record our album. We ended up coming home. And after a couple weeks, we realized that we were going to lose our income for a while. We didn't know how long, but we were starting to really think about it. And luckily we had a Patreon going, which, that allows us to be creative from a genuine place. We have like a book club and like a throwback album review, and we just talk about things that are really easy for us to talk about. So that was like a creative safety net for us during this time. We were lucky to have started that in 2019. But then, we started doing this trial period of trying different live streams because we really wanted to get the Daily Breathers going, and we wanted to, give music to people who needed it. So what started as a list of what not to do personally turned into a 40-page manual on how to live stream through a program called OBS, which I put onto my Facebook, and it really quickly started to make the rounds. So it got picked up by Hypebot and Bands in Town and the Recording Academy, and then these venues started reaching out, so I was doing consultations over Zoom. And Club Passim reached out and was like, hey, we've got Kim Ritchie playing a show coming up. Do you want to talk to her about live streaming tips? And I was like, Kim Ritchie, my hero. I watched her play the Ryman like 3 months ago. I will absolutely talk to her. which led to, me asking like, hey, are you interested in doing a co-write? And once this co-write had happened, we realized that we were writing really timely music at the same time that we were recording music that we couldn't tour. So we ended up shelving this album and continuing the co-writing train with Dar Williams and Tom Paxton, a couple other really amazing writers who inspired us to become writers, and put out music that best expressed, some of the grieving and the healing that we were feeling during this time, because that's what we were writing about. And that was the only way that I personally could process any of it, because I could not write anything alone. It was better to work together during this time to really just feel less alone in the process and not feel the burden of trying to encapsulate something that the started, I feel, live streaming. If I'm traveled back and told be but ultimately you don't really know where life is going to take you, and so the best thing that you can do is just adjust and embrace opportunities. Like you guys said, consider every opportunity, leave no opportunity unconsidered. There we go.
Well, first off, all of you on the call today rock, because this is bringing up some of the issues that I definitely wanted to talk today. All right, so now the Accidentals and Dessa, you're sitting on new music. And I think what's kind of fun is, Sav, what you were just talking about, that's not the traditional release strategy. That is not how you ramp up towards, an album. That's not the single and then the video. But before we unpack that, I want to go back to Dessa, because you're in the same place. You now have an album, but you've been dropping a single a month. You've been going out and adding exclusive pieces of merchandise concurrent with every single. It's almost as if we got halfway through 2020 and just threw the Donald Passman music business book out the window. What made you, and I think I even said this in the notes I sent you all, I worked with a small indie years ago, and we always had that, I wonder if someday you could release a single at a time. Would that really sort of help with the rollout? What drove that decision, Dessa, to really, decouple an album and song, video, merch, song, video, what led that?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, I feel like the momentum had probably been gathering steam since before the pandemic. And that I think the big concern is, well, if you put out a single, no one's going to buy just a single. How would you monetize it? And then we found ourselves in a scenario where no one's buying music anyway. So, no one's buying a single no matter when you release it. So I think in my conversations with Becky and with our cohort, Laserbeak, who runs Doomtree, there had been a lot of discussions about how to monetize stuff with touring off the table. Like Asaf was saying before, just to watch all of the ink evaporate essentially from your day planners, really nothing on the horizon, other than the occasional like voiceover gig and stuff. So trying something new to make money meant like, hey, if we're not getting it on the road, what else could we effectively monetize? And maybe that does mean like, a live stream that has a paywall at some point. Maybe that means like for us, the route that we took was to try to do like custom merchandise that's bespoke and limited edition that's released on the same day as a new song. So I knew I wanted to do a monthly single release. And in part, that was just because I wasn't sure how long this was going to last. So I wanted something that was flexible enough that we could bail on it when we got vaccinated. And then the task was to try to create a campaign that would somehow remind fans of when to look for the new music. So we called it Ides, so that we could put out a song on the 15th of the month every month. And then also I think it was just like I'm not real woo woo generally. Like I feel like I lean real maybe rational to a fault, at least in my thinking, but I just couldn't agree more with what Sav was saying about like how important like a renewed appreciation for how important art is this year. And even just like my relationship with Netflix has really, really changed. Like Netflix was so important to me this year, and particularly the serial stuff. And so I liked the idea of creating a serial project where there was something to look forward to, even in a really long winter.
And that resonates. You know, we had Mitch Glazer from the RIAA speaking shortly before you all, and he pointed out that there were 8.6 trillion music streams in 2020 in the United States. And someone in the chat should tell me if I got that right or if I got that wrong. I think it's trillion, not billion. Pointing out to say, what we all do is not food or water or shelter, but oh my gosh, in a time of crisis, we went to Netflix. We went to our favorite records. We went to all of those pieces of art that bring us solace. So thank you to the artists on the call. Becky, I want to dovetail off of what Dessa was just saying before we jump back to Sav. Okay, so it's been a crazy year, and now there's new music, and there's the discussion of launching a new seemingly crazy plan. How do you guide an artist? How do you bring logistics and pragmatism into a haze or a fog like that?
Well, when we first started launching this single series, we talked a lot about just what the long-term goal was and what shape it would take, as far as having there be a single with a merch item attached and have it be on a regular schedule, to give fans something to look forward to every month. And the thing that appealed to me about that is just doing something sort of cyclically on a schedule. So you sort of get a system in place, and it feels like a manageable thing where you're putting out a single once a month. You're responding to like human behavior of wanting something on a schedule, but also sort of like music fan behavior about wanting singles and not necessarily a full album. And also, I think the strategy with singles, Dessa was able to create sort of standalone projects that didn't necessarily have the same sort of cohesion that an album would have. They're not thematically tied. I mean, there's like a silly rap song and then a song without any verbs, and the next song is like, the feel good hit of the summer, that don't necessarily make sense to, as a package, even though we probably will eventually package them. But, as just sort of like a standalone project, I think they function completely individually with each other. But from a logistics side, we just sort of have our system in place where every month we have to do the merch thing, make sure that we're hitting all of our deadlines. And by the fourth month, I got an email from one of our collaborators in Doomtree and said, that was the smoothest rollout yet, which was great. It only took us 4 times to really nail it.
Well, there's a follow-up question to that. This idea of practice makes perfect. Becky, you represent other artists. Would it be easier to turn around and move to a single release strategy for other people, or did this seem to work with Dessa in the moment?
I work with another artist that from September until February released a single every 2 weeks. And that schedule to me felt a little bit aggressive, and it was hard to really focus on a track or give it enough shine before the next one came out. So but I mean, as a project, it was definitely an interesting way to try to present music, just sort of like on a constant rotation. And then we put out an album at the end of it. So it's sort of a similar strategy, but just a way more aggressive timetable. But I liked it. I mean, I think my experience in the past has been just to put out an album, drop a couple singles before the album comes out, and then you just start that cycle. But I liked doing this way. Yeah.
So Sav, to you, Dessa and Becky were just sort of unpacking that there's a mix of creative potential and fun, also though with some pragmatism and smart planning behind it. And Dessa also alluded to having a team, Becky, Laserbeak, to go to, and obviously you have the rest of the band to have these discussions. What have you all learned creatively about releasing art into the world from this past year? You're sitting on a record. What can you divulge about how you're going to release it? Or, maybe this is a better starting question. Do you think what you've learned from the live streaming, will live streaming stay a part of your quiver, long term?
Yeah, I think the idea behind Shelving Vessel was that we're primarily a touring band. Like I said, or like Amber said, 250 shows a year was our average before this. And, when we started writing about things that were timely. Ultimately, we did so with some really amazing people in the industry. So we felt like we could release Time Out and kind of use it as a way to direct attention towards the upcoming release, especially since we'd be able to tour it. So that was kind of one of the ideas and reasons for doing so. But as far as live streaming continuing, to be around and be in the tool well, I absolutely think that one of the best things that live streaming allowed was accessibility. Not just for people overseas, but also for people who just can't attend every concert or can't attend any concerts whatsoever. Immunocompromised people had the opportunity to still attend a live stream or a concert where, we would be in the rounds, Bluebird Cafe style, with like some writers maybe they've heard of, some writers maybe they've never heard of. And there was just such an accessibility to people who might not have otherwise had as much of a platform, or people who might not have had the ability to go see people on that platform. So I'm hoping that as we move into a more normal, quote unquote, world, I think we'll hopefully take live streaming with us and use it to keep that accessibility going. I think that some venues are already opening up half cap and then supplementing their sales with tickets via live stream. So I'm hoping that, we keep live streaming going. And now that most venues are kind of familiar with the process of how that works, I think it'll only get better.
It's interesting. It dawns on me that what you all have shared is not unlike what all the educators at the summit have talked about. It was really hard to transition to all online delivery for so many, but then in working through how do you communicate to the young people in the room, not unlike communicating to an audience, I think there's consensus that all of the educators in the last year have learned things that we will never let go of. There really were valuable pieces in terms of accessibility, in terms of timeliness, in terms of decoupling complex topics into here's a 5-minute video and a follow-up 5-minute video. So maybe sort of a broad piece to all of you. What are you excited about for the rest of the year? What are you really looking forward to, in addition to venues opening up? Because it seems that now both of you and your teams, you've got some exciting momentum. What is the rest of the year going to hold? To anyone.
I'm going in. I'm excited. I'm also like a little prematurely like stage frighty and nervous to just like make that step back onto stage again. And I'm talking to a couple of other performers. Some of it has to do with like, oh, I'm rusty, sure. But a lot of it I think also has to do with just, I don't know. Like it's just been such a demoralizing year for humans. And there is like that little dose of grandiosity that is involved with like getting in front of big lights and putting your arms out and presuming that you warrant attention from strangers. And yeah, I think there is sort of a weird, like sort of speed bump that a lot of the performers that I've spoken with are perceiving between here and like standing confidently behind a microphone or behind a guitar, but I'm excited. And I think I don't, I'm not right now in an environment where I'm like working with a band, so I don't see my bandmates regularly, but harmony, like that's something I can't do by my, oh God. And I think it's gonna, I think those first few shows back, it's gonna be tough to hold a note because I'm gonna want to cry, because I'm gonna so enjoy 3-part harmony again.
Yeah, going off of that, I think there are songs that benefit from large crowds singing along with you, and that's definitely going to bring me to tears. I think that what I'm most excited about is that people, when we come back, will have such a greater appreciation for the art that got them through this time. There will be such a communal sense of gratitude just by being able to hug somebody else. I mean, there typically is at festivals, but man, I mean, it's just gonna be a giant love fest. I don't know. I'm really excited about that. I think we'll never forget what art meant to us during this time. That is one huge positive that came out of isolation.
Managers on this enthusiasm, how do you help set that up? And I'm sure Dessa, Sav, you both tour internationally. International seems like a still a riddle of how to crack at this point. And, I'm wondering, is it going to be full speed ahead on the logistics front? And let's start the machine. But, Becky, you and Amber were just speaking to, hey, it took almost a year to wind the machine down. So I can't imagine that there's going to be 50 dates at the end of this year. How are you two both approaching the rest of 21?
It's funny that you would ask that. The Accidentals are still releasing their first album that they started working on in October, and we currently have a 48-day tour, and it's booked. I mean, it's been booked and unbooked and rebooked, and it starts October 1st and it goes through November 20th. And the dates are there, the money's there. Some of the venues are still at half cap, and that's okay. The contracts are written regardless of that. And there's such enthusiasm. It's incredible talking to the venues who, the buyer's been laid off for a year, or the venue has been struggling to stay alive for a year. I was on the phone with the Arc in Ann Arbor the other day, and we both started crying because we did it. We have a date. We have There's a light, it's at the end of the tunnel. We're headed towards it. It's just a really incredible restart, I think. But also I 100% agree with Sav that the fans have waited so long, and the music lovers who live for that live concert scene have waited for so long, and they're just it's almost like breathing for them. It's like I've been waiting to breathe for a long time. So there is going to be such a greater appreciation, I feel like, for the live music, and for people who, absence makes the heart grow fonder part. So I'm hoping the venues are full, capacity full, like as in like safely full. And, the minute that the booking was available, these guys have probably 10 shows a month now until starting in July. We held off June, starting in July through the end of October, or starting in July till the end of September. They're doing outdoor shows, and then October we'll start our indoor run. So we'll see.
Do you want to talk about how we're doing that safely? Or do you want me
Very
to?
Safely. A lot has changed. We're pre-selling the merch. So you have an app that you can order merch on and pick it up as you leave. That's very new. And I love that, actually. That might be something we're all glad we found. And then, everybody has to be vaccinated on crew. You don't have a choice when it comes to this band. And, all the supports are put in place. There is no meet and greet any longer. There is a pre-show. You get a half hour extra content and early seating, but there is no handshakey. So those things have all changed. But, we sat down with a team of people and came up with really strict protocol about green rooms and food, and all the riders have changed, and all the hospitality has changed. And, it's been quite the production to get started again. Even for the outdoor shows, there's a lot in place right now. So I'm hoping that, these guys stuck it out for a year and a half because they have that, they have that demographic that they were really worried about. And so at this point, if you have had the chance to be vaccinated, which almost everybody has had that opportunity, and you're still taking that risk, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the fall, but I feel like we've all done the best that we could, really.
Becky, what's the mood in your office briefly before we
I'm
wrap things up?
getting emotional right now just thinking about the return of live music. I think, like everybody else, I'm so excited for it, and I'm excited for artists to be able to get back on stage, for someone in my role to be able to set everything up for them and solve all the problems so they can get on stage and do their thing, and the fires are put out in the background. I'm excited to do that kind of work again. And I'm just excited for fans to have that shared experience of concert going. That's like one of the things that brings me the most joy as a behind the scenes person, is just to peek out from side stage and just to look at people's faces and see the happiness and the rapt attention and all of the emotions that people experience when they see music from an artist that they love. And I'm so excited to be in that position again.
Sav, I hope our paths cross. If so, I'd love to see you and invite you to mine.
Yes, absolutely. I keep in touch.
As a last closing point, we're always cognizant of young people, that next generation as educators. Is there anything in your brain, a piece of advice that you would throw to the next generation, having just lived through what we've just lived through? What's needed in the future? What skills? What attitudes? What's our pass along?
I'm going in. I'd say like a generosity of spirit, I think, is something that that as an indie artist, like, who can like pick her own team. Like, I've loved working with Becky, and to be honest, I've loved the ability to say, like, you are a jerk. I don't want to work with you. You seem really like. But I think this year has really reinforced that. Like, what does it actually mean? Like, so often all the artists are always on tour, and so you crisscross one another, and you see each other's posters in the same bathrooms or whatever. So that you're all sort of traversing the same general tour, the same general route. But really having a better understanding this year of the community, even if it's an itinerant community. You know what I'm saying? So like, okay, that person is a session bassist. There's nothing for that person right now. There's no live streaming for that person. Like, how is that person making rent? And just being like more mindful of the ecosystem in which I exist and more generous, and I think we've learned that this year too. Like, the person in front of you at the grocery store who's like tweaking out and looking not very cool, like, could have just lost somebody. You really just don't know, man. Yeah. And I hope to carry some of that forward, because I think it can be sort of easy to get caught up into the whirlwind of like, what are pre-sales and what are Twitter likes right now, and how many people viewed the YouTube. It could feel like an arcade game that's populated by high scores instead of like friable people. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, going off of that, I think human beings are really capable of acute compassion, but we have a harder time with broad empathy. I think, when somebody's standing right in front of you, like you're saying at the grocery store, we tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, or we get really non-confrontational, especially if you're from the Midwest, shout out. But as far as, understanding a general human crisis, I think we still have a long way to go. And that was one thing I learned from watching the events of this year. There are some people who are so tapped into that broad sense of empathy for human basic rights. And then there are some people who still need to tap into that and understand how they're part of the same community of people who deserve basic human rights. So, that's one thing I think that, art was made to kind of tap into that universal emotional community. And going forward, I think we just keep soldiering on, keep putting that kind of work out, and keep reminding people we're all part of the same community.
Well, Sav, that's just perfect. With that, let me say thank you to all of you for being part of that community, part of that ecosystem, and part of the solution that we're all looking for. It was thrilling to have an entire conversation talking about optimism and excitement. It's needed after this year. So Dessa, Sav, Becky, Amber, thank you so much. I can't wait to see you all out on the road doing some of the things that you all are so uniquely talented at. Thank you so much.
Scott, that was an incredible panel as always.